Jerusalem stands still today, a city heavy with remembrance. In the shadow of stone monuments and the echo of prayers, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed a nation still scarred by months of war. The ceremony, held in memory of soldiers killed during the Gaza conflict, unfolded in solemn silence. Flags lowered, uniforms pressed, and families gathered with photographs clutched close to their hearts. This was not merely a commemoration. It was a declaration of intent. As the Prime Minister took the podium, the atmosphere shifted from grief to resolve. In his words, Israel's mourning was to become a mission, a national pledge to bring home every hostage still held in Gaza, whether alive or fallen. As we embrace the families of the hostages, both those who have already come home and those we will bring back, we are determined to bring every last one of them home. Those were the words that defined the day, clear, deliberate and resonant. They cut through the stillness of the ceremony and reminded every listener that for Israel, the war's objectives are not yet complete. Netanyahu's tone was measured but unwavering. Behind him sat rows of grieving parents and comrades, their faces etched with the fatigue of loss. Around them, Israel's political and military leadership, men and women who have spent the past year balancing combat operations with diplomatic maneuvers, listened in silence. The Prime Minister's vow touches on one of the most sensitive issues facing Israel today, the return of hostages. Dozens remain unaccounted for since the height of the Gaza fighting. Some are presumed dead, others their fate unknown. The families of those missing have become symbols of endurance, appearing at rallies, camping outside government offices, and pleading for updates that seldom come. Each press conference, each whisper of negotiation offers a flicker of hope. The government's challenge is immense. The military can launch operations to pressure Hamas, but each move risks the lives of those still trapped. Diplomats can talk, but the channels are narrow, the mediators few, and the leverage limited. That is why Netanyahu's speech carried both comfort and caution, comfort for the bereaved and caution for the adversaries who still hold leverage. Our wonderful sons and daughters who gave their lives in the war effort are the foundational pillars of the rebirth of Israel, he said. Jews, Druze, Christians, Muslims, Bedouins, Circassians, and members of other communities. They acted shoulder to shoulder to achieve all the objectives of the war, and we will indeed achieve all the objectives of the war. That statement was not just ceremonial rhetoric, it was a political signal, one aimed at a divided home front and an uncertain region. In recent months, criticism of the government's war management has intensified. Some accuse Netanyahu of prolonging operations to maintain political power. Others demand that the focus shift from military action to negotiation. Yet in the Prime Minister's framing, the war effort remains an unfinished task, one tied to unity, sacrifice and national destiny. The inclusivity of his message, invoking Jews and minorities alike, was deliberate. It projected an image of shared purpose, a coalition of citizens bound by loss and determination. In the midst of polarization, that unity was both a balm and a statement that despite political disputes, the nation remains one body when it comes to its soldiers and its hostages. As the ceremony unfolded, cameras captured a striking moment. Netanyahu stepped down from the podium to greet a mother who had lost her son. Their exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it spoke volumes about the distance between power and pain, about the weight carried by those who send others into battle. For her, the war is not an abstract policy. It is the empty chair at every meal, the echo in every room. In Israel, such ceremonies are both national rituals and political tests. They remind citizens of sacrifice, but also measure a leader's empathy. Netanyahu's choice of words, his gestures, his pauses, all were calibrated to convey resolve without triumphalism. The Prime Minister's speech also contained a warning, and one directed squarely at Israel's enemies. One thing is clear today, he said. Anyone who raises his hand against us already knows that he will pay a very heavy price for his aggression. That line carried the full weight of deterrence. It was not meant for the grieving families before him, but for those listening beyond Israel's borders, a reaffirmation that military readiness remains intact and that attacks will be met with force. In Israel's security vocabulary, such statements are never idle. They are signals to Hamas, to regional militias, and to global allies that the state remains on alert. Beyond the ceremony's walls, life in Israel continues under the tension of unfinished business. The Gaza ceasefire has held in fragments, uneasy, conditional and fragile. Occasional exchanges of fire still erupt along the border, and diplomatic efforts to secure a lasting settlement remain in limbo. The hostages, meanwhile, have become the emotional core of the national story, their faces on posters, their names read aloud at vigils, their families moving between grief and activism. Internationally, the hostage issue has drawn in an array of mediators. Egypt and Qatar have worked behind closed doors, facilitating messages and limited exchanges. The United States and European allies continue to press for humanitarian corridors and the release of civilians. But every negotiation is shadowed by mistrust and politics. Hamas seeks leverage, Israel seeks closure, and in between lie the families, waiting, pleading, remembering. For many Israelis, Netanyahu's words today were both a promise and a test of credibility. Can the government truly bring everyone home, or will some remain forever missing, their stories left open-ended in the national narrative? The Prime Minister's insistence, every last one of them, raises the stakes. It binds his political legacy to an outcome still uncertain. The ceremony itself reflected the duality of Israel's mood: pride in its soldiers, sorrow for its losses, and defiance in the face of adversity. Soldiers performed ceremonial tributes. Musicians played restrained, mournful notes. A mother's speech drew quiet tears from the audience, and above it all, Netanyahu's voice carried the tone of continuity, a leader seeking to project control over a reality that remains profoundly unstable. Observers note that such events serve multiple audiences. Domestically, they reassure the public. Regionally, they signal intent. Internationally, they project a consistent message of resilience. Israel, the Prime Minister implies, will not relent, not in its security objectives, nor in its humanitarian commitments to retrieve its citizens. But the complexity runs deeper. Bringing hostages home often involves trade-offs, negotiations for prisoner exchanges, pauses in fighting, or indirect concessions through intermediaries. Each of these decisions sparks fierce political debate. Critics argue that deals embolden militant groups, while supporters insist that no price is too high to bring citizens home. This moral tug-of-war is not new. It has shaped Israeli policy for decades. In that sense, today's ceremony was both a remembrance and a rehearsal, a public reaffirmation of Israel's guiding principles: security, unity, and the sanctity of life. Netanyahu's references to interfaith solidarity, Jews, Druze, Christians, Muslims, underscore another message: that Israel's identity, often seen through the lens of conflict, is also rooted in diversity and coexistence within its own borders. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations continue to appeal for transparency and humane treatment of all captives. The International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations have called for verification mechanisms, emphasizing that dignity in death and safety in captivity are universal rights. For families still waiting, those statements are cold comfort, but they keep the issue alive on the global agenda. For the families, however, time moves differently. Each day without news feels like an eternity. Many have turned their grief into advocacy, holding photos at vigils, writing open letters, demanding accountability. They measure government action not in policy statements, but in returned names, in confirmed identities, in funerals and reunions. And so the Prime Minister's words today, broadcast live across Israel, carry personal weight. For some, they offer reassurance. For others, they stir anger and impatience. Determined, the word that headlined every news bulletin, now becomes both a pledge and a metric by which his leadership will be judged. As evening fell over Jerusalem, the ceremony concluded in quiet dignity. Soldiers lowered flags, the anthem played, and the families dispersed. But the questions lingered. When and how will every last hostage be brought home? For Netanyahu, that question is now inseparable from his legacy. The speech's closing line, "We will indeed achieve all the objectives of the war," encapsulates that ambition. Yet in Israel's crowded political landscape, objectives are never simple. There are security goals, humanitarian goals, and the elusive pursuit of peace. Each requires trade-offs, each demands patience, and each carries consequences far beyond the battlefield. Internationally, the reaction to the speech has been cautious. Western allies welcome the reaffirmation of humanitarian commitments, but remain concerned about further escalation. Arab states, too, watch closely, balancing domestic sympathy for Palestinians with the pragmatic need to avoid a wider regional flare-up. Diplomacy, for now, remains the only sustainable path forward. Still, the tone of Netanyahu's address leaves no doubt. Israel will pursue its objectives with what he calls the heavy price of aggression as a deterrent. It is a familiar formula: military strength as the backdrop to negotiation. Whether that approach yields peace or prolongs stalemate remains to be seen. The ceremony in Jerusalem offered a snapshot of Israel at a crossroads, wounded, wary, yet unyielding. In the eyes of many Israelis, bringing the hostages home is not just an act of policy, it is an act of identity, a statement that no citizen is forgotten, no sacrifice dismissed. The government's ability to fulfill that promise will define not just its credibility abroad, but its cohesion at home. As night descends over the city, the candles lit in remembrance continue to burn. They flicker against the darkened marble, against photographs of those lost, and against the faces of families who refuse to give up hope. In their quiet persistence lies the true measure of determination, the kind that no speech can manufacture, but every leader must honor. From Jerusalem, this is a story not only of remembrance, but of resolve, a nation looking backward to its pain and forward to its unfinished promises. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's words will echo long after the crowd has dispersed, a vow to bring the missing home, to secure the future, and to hold fast to the conviction that even in the aftermath of war, purpose endures.